Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, here on Friday, December 20th. After a bit of days away from the show, getting back on here for the holidays and the break period. We're going to have a couple of days off here at GSMC, a couple of days this week, and then probably this upcoming week, no shows for the week of Christmas, and then we'll be back again the following week for a couple days before we're fully into the swing of things once the new year starts and everything like that. But we are getting close to the end of the year, the calendar year, and also the end of the NFL calendar year, at least the regular season, because we have about 3 to 2 weeks left here in the NFL. Week 16 started last night with the Chargers and Broncos game that we're going to get into on today's show. Plus, being away for a couple days, we're going to get into the game picks, both part 1 and part 2 in today's show, as well as talking about the first Saturday edition of the NFL tomorrow, with the Ravens playing the Steelers and the Texans playing the Kansas City Chiefs. All of that coming up on today's show. But before we get started, I'd like to mention to you guys, again, if you were unaware, if you guys want to get involved with the show in any way, with any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so. We always appreciate your input and insight on anything you'd like to bring up or any of the topics we are currently talking about as well during these live shows. So please make sure to go and do that. But also, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat, and this way I'm able to see your question, and it guarantees that I read it out loud and feature it on the show, and that way get a different perspective on maybe something you guys are thinking about or anything on the current topic. Anything really adds to the show, and it always makes it a lot better. So again, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and that way you're able to use the Super Chat feature and getting involved with the show. So that is that, and we are able to move on now to our first topic here, being the game we saw last night. A pretty entertaining one, as usually divisional games go. This one was in the AFC West. We saw, curiously, only the second time this year that the Chargers have scored 33 points, and it was the first loss for the Denver Broncos when they've scored 21 or more points. Yesterday, all of that to say that yesterday was a pretty high-scoring game. Looking around at what people thought of the game going in, a lot of people thought there would be a very heavily defensive contest, like a 21 to 16 type of game, right? I was honestly leaning that way as well. Based on the first game, I'm pretty sure it was only 23 to 17 the first time around, but this one was a lot more high scoring, obviously, and the Chargers came away on the winning end once again. This was a second meeting between them. Yeah, it was 23 to 16 the first time around in Denver, and now the Chargers returned home, and they were able to overcome a deficit in the second half and win this game to sweep the Broncos. And the Chargers, came away with the win to not only sweep the series, but the final score was 34 to 27, and now the Chargers have the same record as the Broncos at 9-6. And it's important to mention both of their records being the same thing, because the Chargers have swept them, and the fact that they have the same record and are both in the playoffs, the Chargers obviously have that head-to-head record advantage over them. So instead of heading into this game where the Chargers were actually the 7th seed because they had lost 2 games in a row, and because the Broncos were on a 4-game winning streak, the Broncos had actually jumped up to the 6th spot. And depending on how you view the matchups, the Broncos would have been playing most likely the Steelers or the Ravens, depending on whoever won that division. But now, with the way the Chargers won, them having the same record and all, now the Chargers move back up to the number 6 spot, and it would be the Chargers playing either the Ravens or the Steelers and things like that. Not so much of an importance to who's playing the Steelers, but who's trying to avoid playing the Bills, right? I think that's really the most important thing, because I think anybody matching up with the Steelers or the Ravens would feel a lot better, honestly, than going to Buffalo in probably like a blizzard or something and then just getting pummeled on by the Bills. The Bills have not lost at home this season, so that's not a favorable matchup for anybody, quite honestly, in the AFC. So that's really what I think it comes down to in terms of the seedings and things like that, the 5, the 6, and the 7th seed, all of that, trying to avoid the Bills and probably the Kansas City Chiefs as well. But talking about the playoffs here a little bit more, specifically with these two teams, right? We're looking at the Broncos first, and what a win would have meant for them, would have meant that they would have clinched a playoff scenario. But with the loss, now they still have an 85% chance to make it and need just one more win over the last couple weeks here against the Bengals or against the Kansas City Chiefs to clinch a playoff spot the first time in, I want to say, at least 9, maybe even 10 years, almost 10 years. But they still got a good chance of doing it. It's still in their hands, which is still a good thing. So they just got to go out and defeat a Bengals team that's also trying to get into the playoffs. They needed to win out. So that's going to be a pivotal game coming up after that. And the Chiefs game also, it's huge, but the Chiefs, by that time might be resting some starters, so it all could be subject to change over the next couple weeks depending on various results. So the Broncos still, despite the loss, still hold their future in their hands if they can win one of the next 2 games. Then, looking at the Chargers, their chances flew through the roof yesterday after they won. Now they have a 97% chance to make the playoffs with that win, and it can be 100% secured next week if the Colts or the Miami Dolphins lose as well. But I'm sure if the Chargers just end up winning out, they're going to make it into the playoffs anyway. So very much like the Broncos, they too have their future potentially secured in their hands if they could just handle business or get a little bit of extra help with the Colts and the Dolphins losing on top of that. But on the game yesterday, just talking over it a little bit more, it wasn't a great start for the Chargers, right? When I was checking on it on my phone, I was pretty surprised that the Broncos, got off to such a hot start. At one point, going into halftime, the Broncos were actually up 21-13, and based on that score, I was thinking wow, the Broncos put up 21 points in the first half. That's something I wasn't expecting, going back to the point about, potentially betting the under if you were, doing that last night, betting the under, and it's definitely not on your side at that point. But I was pretty surprised by that, and it went back to even last week where the Chargers lost to the Buccaneers 40. They lost to them 40-17 or something like that. So piling that performance on top of last night, I'm thinking the Chargers, I was hoping we weren't going to see the typical Chargers performance, right, where they collapse towards the end of games or towards the end of seasons and just find new ways to surprise you in ways that they blow, leads or games or their own scenarios, right? But, it was very promising to see how the second half went, obviously, but it was a little concerning because considering the second half of the Buccaneers game and the first half of this Broncos game, the Chargers had been outscored 48-13 in those games, the second half and the first half of last night's game. So that was a bit worrying, but there was some reports, and then just after the game, talking to, Derwin James, how he mentioned some things, how he actually gave a halftime speech instead of, Jim Harbaugh, right? And more so focused on the defense and just them, kind of getting them to react, right? Because they've been so good the entire year, basically, and now the last couple of games are starting to have second thoughts. So that speech definitely worked because after the first half, where they gave up 229 total yards, they only gave up 107 total yards in the second half. And I thought they did a good job of not only, corralling Bo Nix a little bit more because he was running a lot in the first half, but, everything just was more crisp and efficient. There wasn't any, lapses in coverage or anything like that, or over pursuing, Bo Nix and letting him run up the middle. I thought they tidied everything up, and it looked a lot more like the old Chargers defense than what we had been seeing over the last couple weeks. And what was pretty interesting, though, in this game, too, was before, we went into halftime where you kind of felt the Chargers needed something, and I didn't think it was going to be like this, but the Chargers, were in a situation where there was 8 seconds left in the first half, and Jim Harbaugh called the timeout and made the Broncos punt it, right? You're thinking, why is he doing that? It doesn't even matter. They're not going to do anything, right, in 8 seconds. But still, he went through it, and the Broncos punted, and the punt returner for the Chargers called the fair catch or just interfered with him in a way which, drew the flag, but there was no time left. So what do, right? It was a very niche and very unique situation in this scenario where, because the time ran out, there is still a penalty flag, so you got to call it. And basically, because the foul was accepted and there was a foul, the Chargers had an option to kick how did they put it? Like a free kick, basically. They had an opportunity to have a free kick, right? And it was very weird. I've never seen anything like it, obviously, but they lined up about 57 yards away. It was a 57-yard field goal attempt, basically, like a free kick, obviously, because of the fact that time ran out, and because they got fouled, they got the opportunity to have a free play, essentially. Just a wrinkle in the rule book that I don't think a lot of people knew, other than Jim Harbaugh, I guess. And they basically got a free 3 points from that point because the Broncos were supposed to line up 10 yards away from the ball, so they were never going to block it. And the Chargers kicker hit it, and, it was only 3 points, right? It's nothing like super monumental, but either way, I felt like at that moment, when you get something so random and like crazy like that to happen, it felt like it kind of started to shift a little bit, right? And then you only look up and you're only down 8 points, and the Chargers know that they could have played better. Then I felt like the Chargers, it really started to swing in their momentum a little bit more. And as you saw in the second half, it went more in their way. Their offense opened up a little bit more, and really their defense came a lot better prepared in the second half. So that's really what led to this win. And just overall in both of these two teams, it's crazy that we're talking about them, kind of just big picture here, because there was no way I would have ever thought the Chargers and the Broncos would be in this position, but it's pretty refreshing to see just overall from last night's game and how both of them, put up like 27 and 34 points, how they've, bested their odds, they've over-exceeded expectations through, good quarterback play, good coaching, great defenses, and for them to be in these positions, it's crazy to see, but, a huge credit to them for getting this far with a rookie quarterback and a whole new, system being implemented in Los Angeles. It's pretty cool to see. So they definitely deserve major props, and they played up to the competition for the most part, so that's always good to see as well. But both of these two teams reside in the AFC, and that's really what we're going to focus on in the next segment with the Saturday games that we have coming up tomorrow in the AFC North, with the Steelers taking on the Ravens and the Chiefs taking on the Houston Texans. Potential playoff matchups in certain scenarios. We're going to go over them in the next segment and talk about some, viewpoints that I have on each game, just preview them a little bit ahead of tomorrow's game. So we'll be right back with that after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alright guys, we are jumping back in to talk about the weekend that we have coming ahead for, the NFL. Not looking ahead to Sunday as much as we usually do, right, with these segments, looking at the Sunday slates, but looking at what we have coming up tomorrow for the first Saturday edition of the NFL, starting tomorrow with a couple of two great games that we have for the NFL tomorrow, with the Steelers and the Ravens, like I mentioned, and the Chiefs taking on the Houston Texans. And also, as kind of a side note, just really part of a great Saturday overall if you are an avid football fan, because not only do we have two great NFL games, but also if you're up early, early subjectively, at 12 o'clock, noontime Eastern time, you have the opportunity to watch more of the college football playoffs that are also really starting tonight with Indiana and Notre Dame. But also tomorrow, part of those NFL games, we have SMU taking on Penn State at noon, like I mentioned, Clemson taking on Texas as well at 4 o'clock. And in the nighttime, we have the Titans taking on the University of Tennessee, not the Titans, taking on Ohio State. So a full day of football, which is going to be awesome, with playoff implications in the NFL as well as the actual playoffs in college football. So very much looking forward to that in in like 12 hours or something like that. So focusing on the NFL though a little bit more. The first game is set to kick off between the Chiefs, and the Houston Texans at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on NBC and Peacock. Then the second game between the Steelers and the Ravens is set to kick off at 4:30 p.m. on Fox. And just like I mentioned there previously before we went into the commercial, I wanted to just talk about both games and mention some things that, I was pretty interested in with both matchups. There's a lot to talk about with both of them, and for time's sake, I didn't have time to preview them, like I usually do. So we're going to go through them a little bit quickly and talk about some talking points. So starting off with the first game, obviously, we have the Chiefs and the Texans. And one of the things that stands out just quickly is it's the first time we're going to see C.J. Stroud taking on Patrick Mahomes. And, Patrick's obviously at the top of the mountain in terms of quarterbacks. But, it is always pretty fascinating to see him take on like new, up-and-coming quarterbacks who people think are capable of reaching that next step and joining maybe a Patrick or a Lamar or a Josh Allen in that, tier of quarterbacks. So this is the first time he's squaring up against CJ, definitely the best quarterback from last year's draft class. So that's going to be, an interesting sort of narrative in it of itself. But there's also, for the Kansas City Chiefs, really two great pieces of news that we got yesterday with Patrick Mahomes, really yesterday and really throughout the week, where all the talk was about his high ankle sprain and whether or not he should play, whether or not he would be able to play. Is he going to get hurt more? Is it smart to do it with that offensive line and the struggles that they've had? But yesterday, really throughout the week, Patrick, for the most part, has been a full participant in practice. So, it doesn't have to come down to Andy Reid, right? And in a certain scenario where he's limited or he's, kind of going through it a little bit, not really a full participant in practice, with the fact that it's also on a Saturday, it could have came down to Andy Reid and him making the decision whether or not to play Patrick. But it looks like it doesn't have to come down to that. If he's fully practicing, then it's almost like, in a way, it's almost like he doesn't have an injury, right? If he's fully practicing, he's going to play, right? But also, you can't just kind of just push it over to the side and pretend it hasn't happened, because a high ankle sprain and the way that, Patrick kind of got rolled up on was pretty scary, and it could have been a lot worse, obviously, with the knee and everything like that. But luckily, it wasn't. But still, like an ankle injury, like hamstring injuries, and I feel like those two are the most complicated and just like the most taxing and just pretty annoying to get rid of, or really get a gauge of where these players are fully if, it flares up again or he gets hit the wrong way or missteps. It doesn't take much for you to land on another guy's foot or your offensive lineman to step on your ankle, and now you have another problem, right? In a just weird and random situation like that, it's always something that could happen. So that's where, some of the risk and doubt, came from when talking about whether Patrick should play or not, considering also that they play a few days later on Christmas Day. Was it worth it for him to play? And, just on that, I thought he was going to play, considering the way that he was talking after the game. But, there was always a chance that he couldn't have. But in terms of, sitting him just to kind of prepare him for the rest of the games, I think that's where I deviate just because, you're talking to the leader, not only the face of his team, but the face of the NFL. He doesn't strike me as a guy to just be like, you know what, this next game is more important, and I could afford to miss this game, right? This game maybe not so important. I could just take off, take a little bit of a break here, preserve my ankle, and decide basically to not play and just save myself for the next couple games. Where he doesn't strike me as that kind of guy, and as a leader, how does that affect other people if he's able to go and decides you know what, maybe I'll just take a rest here and save myself for the next game. That doesn't really feel like him. And also, with that in mind, nobody's really healthy. You look at other guys, they're battling with knee injuries, ankle injuries of their own, and then just being sore and tired regardless. So if they see their leader, kind of saying, you know what, I don't really feel like playing this game, I'm going to wait till the next one, that doesn't really rub off right. So that's also where, I never really felt like it was a true conversation to have in that regard. So Patrick's going to play. And not only Patrick, but Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown, if you were unaware that he was on the Chiefs, I don't necessarily blame you because he got hurt in the preseason and has been out the entire year with a dislocated SC joint in his shoulder. And it was severe enough for him to miss. They thought he was going to miss the entire regular season, but apparently, he's come back ahead of time. He's got the medical green light, and he returned to practice this week. And head coach Andy Reid said yesterday that he has a good chance of making his debut tomorrow against the Houston Texans. And then just the way that we just talked about Pat's injury and how, there are still some doubts about it and the offensive line, bringing back Marquise Brown is definitely going to be a huge kind of solution to all of that, right? Not only do you improve your offense that could be classed as struggling a little bit or just not the usual Kansas City Chiefs offense, but also kind of protecting Patrick a little bit because you just add another weapon where he could get rid of the ball quicker, and he has a guy that's probably more reliable, I would say, at this point, even though, he hasn't played, obviously, but he is a veteran receiver now, and he brings a lot. Obviously, that's why they signed him on a one-year deal. They knew that he was going to bring something to this team, and now to have him back ahead of schedule in the critical point of the season, you couldn't have asked for much more. So the Chiefs are looking good. I'm sure they're feeling good at this point, and their counterpart, the Houston Texans, right? I think it's kind of fascinating how at the beginning of the year, I was one of the people that was very high in the Houston Texans, they were a super team. I had them up there with the Eagles and the Lions and the Chiefs to an extent also, where they just had so many pieces. And then of course Stephon Diggs gets hurt, and they really just haven't really stepped into what we thought they would be, in terms of just dominating people. It hasn't been anything like the Eagles, obviously, but I feel like it's fascinating how no one's really talking about them a little bit more because they are in the playoffs. They are the division winners, but it still feels like everyone's talking about, rightly so in a way, with the Bills, obviously, and the Chiefs, but I feel like even the Ravens are getting more talk, and the Steelers are getting more talk, and heck, maybe even the Chargers are being talked about a little bit more. But the Texans are just kind of sitting there at the number 4 spot, and nobody's really giving them any thought or any serious thought. And I thought that was kind of interesting, especially because, at the start of the season and how everything fell. But their defense is getting healthier, and they're playing a lot better. So, yes, no one's talking about them, but, just on this point, on this game, I thought that you look at their defense and how Christian Harris already came back. He's a huge part of their defense. Obviously, the quarterback pressure they're able to bring with Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. And just the turnovers, like last week they had 4 turnovers against the Dolphins. They got to him a lot, and Derek Stingley had a couple interceptions. They're playing pretty well. Their defense is really good, and Joe Mixon's having a solid year. I feel like more people should be talking about them some more, but for some reason they're not catching a lot of people's eye at this point, and it's kind of weird and a little bit interesting. But if they could string together some nice performances like they did last week, they could be heading into the playoffs with some nice momentum, especially if they win tomorrow. So, in terms of the matchup, it's going to be interesting, surely, because of the offensive line and things like that. But I want to go with the Texans to win, but I don't think I'm man enough to do it, so I'm not going to go with them. I think the Chiefs are still going to win. But, the Texans, they could make it close, but the Chiefs don't really lose close games. So that's where the first matchup stands and where, some things I wanted to talk about there. But also in the second matchup that we have with the Steelers and the Ravens, there's not going to be any George Pickens. There's not going to be any Deshaun Elliott for the Steelers. Both of those guys have been ruled out. There's no Nelson Aguilar and potentially Rashad Bateman. I saw that he was in a boot, I want to say today or yesterday at practice. So he's also, a question mark there. But this is essentially to keep the division title race alive or have the Steelers win it. Because if the Steelers win, they'll wrap up the AFC North and, be one of the top 4 seeds. But also, if the Ravens win, they could open the door to potentially beating out the Steelers for the division title. But for the case of the Steelers, the way their kind of road to the playoffs and the seeding, kind of lays out is if they win, they get the division, obviously. But if they lose, it doesn't necessarily mean that that it's in the Ravens' hands, per se. Because it would still be in the Steelers' hands, because if they lose, them and the Ravens would have the same record. But if both of the teams, kind of win out the rest of the way after, the Ravens potentially win tomorrow, if both of the teams win out and win the remaining 2 games, the Steelers would still be division champions because the tiebreaker would go to conference record. And the Steelers have a conference record of 9-3, while the Ravens have a conference record of 8-4. Again, if the Ravens win, and then if the Ravens win out, including tomorrow, and the Steelers lose against the Ravens, but they win their next 2, the Steelers would still be the division champions in that sense. So their future is still in their hands, obviously, and that's a great spot to be. But in terms of tomorrow's game, I feel like there's a lot more pressure on the Ravens to win. And everyone's talking about Lamar and how much he needs to win this game for the record that he has against the Steelers, and basically how they should be the winners of this division. But the Steelers, again, have, kind of proven everybody wrong, and now they're in a great position to win it. But the Ravens, everyone's still riding high on them, rightly so, right? Because Lamar's playing insane. But, for them, playing at home, they really haven't had Lamar in a situation like this, honestly, because really it's just come down to the fact that usually for whatever reason, the second games are always in Baltimore, and by that time, the Ravens have been so good that Lamar doesn't even play in the second matchup. So the personal record, all those games have really just been mostly in Pittsburgh. And it's kind of weird to put it like that, because in 2018, it was his first year, and he didn't play, obviously. Then in 2019, he didn't play just because he was rested, so RG3 played. Then in 2020, he played at home against the Steelers, but there was nobody there because of COVID, obviously. And then in 2021, he was injured and Tyler Huntley played. In 2022, same thing, he was injured and Tyler Huntley played. And last year, they already wrapped up the division and Tyler Huntley played again. So we don't really see Lamar playing in the second game against the Steelers, despite the fact that he's 1-4 and the Steelers have won the last 8 of the 9 games. It's a little bit, with a caveat there, because Lamar hasn't really played in a scenario like this, right? Like a playoff-like scenario. So I think there is something to say about that. Derrick Henry really didn't have an impact in the first game either. And then you look at the Steelers, right? Just getting beat up by the Eagles, and then, not having George Pickens again, and we saw how that offense looked. It should be a game where the Ravens win. And if I were to pick, I would probably side with the Ravens. Because, like I said with the Eagles, I don't really see a way for the Steelers to win. Like, I can't lay out a game plan for the Steelers to win. I don't know how they would without George. They kind of came close last week, but against the Ravens, I still think it's going to be close, but I feel like they're healthier and they need this game a lot more, because if they don't win, it's over, right? They're going to be a wild card team, so they're not going to let that happen, because if they do, we're going to have a lot more of a deeper conversation about this Ravens team. So that's kind of like what's surrounding this game. TJ Watt, how healthy he is also going to be huge with how they defend against Lamar. But yeah, I mean, I'll probably side with the Ravens just because they need this game more, and it's at home. There's going to be tons of people there. It's going to be a raucous crowd, so it still should be a good game. But I think I would side with the Ravens this time over the Steelers. But it should be a great day of football, like I said, regardless tomorrow. And going over tomorrow and then just hopping over to Sunday, we're going to get into our game picks for the weekend, talking, part one, going through the first 6 games, and then in the following segment, going through the remainder of the games as well on Sunday. So we'll be right back with our official picks.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Chip Shot Football Podcast here, and we're going to jump into the first part of our game picks for Week 16 coming up this weekend on Sunday. We went over the Saturday games a little bit in the last segment, but now we can look ahead to Sunday as we typically do, and we got 6 games in this segment, and we're going to finish it off in the next segment with the following 6, but here we're going to start off on the left-hand side looking at the Los Angeles Rams taking on the New York Jets. And the first thing that comes to my mind when I look at this game is just like a very tricky game, I think, for the Rams. Because obviously the Jets don't really have to play for too much other than just like wanting to end the year off well. But the Rams desperately need to, keep this winning streak alive because they got the same record as the Seahawks and they do have the tiebreaker over them. So they need to just keep winning, especially because the Seahawks are playing the the Vikings as well. So they have a tough matchup also. So if they're able to win this game, which they should, just based on record, it would be huge for them for that division and building a bigger lead over the Seahawks. But this game, traveling all the way across the country to play a team that basically have nothing to lose is a bit worrying for me. Especially because the last couple of games, Aaron Rodgers has had a pretty good game. Devontae Adams just went stupid as well. So they got the guys, to create trouble. And again, they're not really playing for too much. So that's always a bit of a weird scenario to kind of maneuver. But picking a winner in this game, I'm going to go with the Rams because their defense is young. And I think they are getting a little bit better as we go along. I really was reassured with the performance against the 49ers last week. So I think they could get after Aaron Rodgers. I believe they will get after him and make it a little bit tougher than obviously the Jaguars did last week. So I like their defense in this game, and it's the last road game of the year for the Rams before they have 2 division games at home to close out the year. So if they could get this win, really the next 2 should be a bit easier in my opinion because you're home, and if you win this game and the Seahawks lose, then you really are in a good spot. So I'm going to go with the Rams here to win this game on the road. Then we go down a little bit further and we look at the Eagles and Commanders matchup. This could be a scenario where the Eagles wrap up the NFC East. If they win, they could wrap up that division and know that they're going to be a top 4 team, as if we really didn't know that already. They were always going to be a top 4 team, but if they could wrap up the division and obviously keep winning because they have the same record as the Lions, maybe the Lions slip up, and if they win, they could be the number 1 seed. And so that's really what the Eagles are playing for, and just winning this game would obviously crown them crown them NFC East champions as well. So the Commanders are obviously going to try and prevent that, right? They need to keep their hopes alive for the division if they get a win. And if they get a win, the doors opened a little bit. The Eagles would have to lose out probably, but it's still, it's still something. The Commanders also don't want to be in a situation where, the Seahawks are kind of chomping at the bit right behind them in the playoffs. So you also need to win so you don't fall too close to the Seahawks, and then you're potentially playing for a spot in the playoffs as well. So there's a lot of necessity here to win this game for both teams, right? Even if the division seems out of reach for the Commanders, they need to win just to stay in the playoffs, right, and be in a good spot. So that's obviously important. And in the last game, they had a decent lead until the Eagles slowly started chipping away at it, and Saquon Barkley closed the door at the end of the game, essentially. But Terry McLaurin didn't really get the ball too much in that game, mostly to the credit of the Eagles. So I expect him to get the ball a little bit more in Washington as well. But is it enough for the Commanders to win? I would say no. I would say no because I didn't like how the Saints probably should have won that game against the Commanders, right? It came down to a 2-point conversion, but still, the Commanders kind of gave up that lead and made it too close for my liking. And the Eagles just came off of beating the Steelers, so I'm going to go with the Eagles. It's hard to be perfect, essentially, against them for a whole 60 minutes, so I'm going to go with the Eagles. Saquon also didn't have a great game last week, so I expect him to have a great game. And the Eagles will win, and they'll wrap up that division on Sunday. Then, talking about the NFC East a little bit, we got the Giants traveling to Atlanta. Michael Penix Jr.'s first start, and I don't think he could have picked a better opponent to start against than the Giants. And, there's not too much to say. I'm going to go with the Falcons. Despite the rookie quarterback starting and everything, with the quarterback situation with the Falcons that we're going to talk about a little bit later, the Giants are just weird team. Anything that's brought up about the Giants, it's almost always negative when you're talking about the planes flying over the stadium, the results, the general manager, the fan reaction to them, obviously, their performance on the field. Nothing's really coming out of there that's positive, so at least the Falcons got, Michael Penix, starting in there and got something going for themselves, obviously, trying to get back into the playoffs. So we're going to go with the Falcons. There's not really too much to say on that. Then we shift over to the other side and look at the Cardinals and Panthers game. Arizona's still fighting a little bit for that division, if that is hard to believe, because the Cardinals are only one game behind the Seahawks and the Rams. So they're not completely out of it. And they still got to play the Rams next week, I believe. So, in a scenario where, let's say the Seahawks lose against the Vikings. If that happens and the Cardinals win this game, then they have the same record as the Seahawks. The Seahawks have beat them twice, so that does, kind of hang over their head, obviously. But they'd have the same record as them, right? And the Seahawks, still got to play the Rams one more time. And because of that, you also look at the Commanders, who have the last spot in the playoffs, but they could be in a scenario where I just picked them to lose, right? So that would make it even closer with you and the Commanders if the Cardinals win this game. And then you get your rematch against the Rams, and then that could give you the opportunity to also close the gap a little bit more with potentially the Seahawks losing, the Commanders losing, and then next week you play the Rams. It could be a pretty, not the most unlikely scenario for the Cardinals to make it really close here. And I'm picking them to win this game because the Panthers have kind of figured it out a little bit, but last week didn't go great against the Cowboys, and they've been close. They've definitely been better, but still, they just haven't found a way to put it all together to actually win the game. So the fact that the Cardinals have this matchup, it is a little bit tricky, but the fact that they have this matchup and it's on the road against a kind of struggling Panthers team, I'm going to go with the Cardinals. I have to believe that they have some bit of hope going into this game that they could win, and then everything else going in their favor could really open the door for them. So I'm going to go with the Cardinals to win this game. And then looking at the game below that, we have the Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals, a Ohio matchup here without Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston was benched, and instead it's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting for the Cleveland Browns. Again, another team that really isn't playing for much, but they could play spoiler. And the Bengals won the first game, obviously, but this could be a scenario where, you bring in a new sort of energy for the Cleveland Browns at the quarterback position, somebody that could run a lot more in a dynamic fashion than, say, Jameis Winston. So, that is something to also throw the Bengals off, I would imagine, because you've been planning for Jameis Winston this entire time, and then all of a sudden, it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So you got to really change the game plan there because they're completely different players. So, even still, despite all of that, I'm gonna go with the Bengals here because the Browns really disappointed me last week because of the fumbles and all the turnovers they had. I mean, the game was only 21-7, but it just feels like it's just so messy. It kind of disorganized in a way, and the offense can't really complement the defense, or the defense can't really complement the offense. So the way the Bengals are playing too, that offense is firing on all cylinders, and for the Browns offense to kind of match them in the first game with a new quarterback, I think that's a bit too much to ask. So I'm going to go with the Bengals in this game. And then lastly here, we got an AFC South matchup between two teams that are probably going to be picking in the top 5, top 7 in the NFL draft. And in this game also, it could be, and most likely is going to be Mason Rudolph starting instead of Will Levis, because Will Levis has had a pretty rough day against Anthony Richardson. And on offense, their defense played pretty well. Their defense held the Broncos offense to, I think, like 193 yards total. Yeah, and they had 3 turnovers as well. They had 3 interceptions on Bo Nix, but their offense really couldn't get it going. Anthony Richardson didn't get his 10th completion or 100 yards until the fourth quarter, so there is a bit of a worry there. And this is one of the most, I don't like saying irrelevant, but there's really not much to play for here, and they're just kind of waiting for the season to end. But in terms of picking a winner, I'm going to go with the Colts because as, worrisome as Anthony Richardson kind of looked in the last game, and it all comes with, developing, obviously, right? But I thought their defense looked pretty well, and their defense was able to create turnovers, create a lot of confusion for the opposing team. So I think Indianapolis is just in a better spot, and they're not as bad as the Titans, in my opinion, simply. So I'm going to go with the Colts to win this game at home and improve their record a little bit, and I expect Anthony Richardson to play better, definitely, than he did in their last game. But this is only part 1 of our game picks. We have the second half coming up after this break, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with 6 more games that you're going to see on Sunday in the NFL.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping back into the action now here on the show, we're going to continue with our game picks now, looking at the second half of the Sunday slate here with let me get it up for you guys, with the NFC North matchup that we have here at the left-hand corner. We have the Lions taking on the Chicago Bears once again. If you remember their first game on Thanksgiving, it was a nail-biting game, really coming down to the last second where the Bears found a new way to disappoint us in the most surprising and just shocking way. With the time management there at the end of the game, it was really, really bad. So now they have an opportunity to kind of right the ship here in their second matchup with the Lions in Chicago this time. So the Lions are going to be playing in the elements. That's something that is kind of like a running narrative with the Lions also being one of those teams that I guess doesn't play outside too much, kind of like the Dolphins, but also the complete opposite of the Dolphins because the Lions actually win. But yeah, I mean, it's the second meeting between these two teams, and the injuries just continue to pile up for the Lions. They're coming off of a very bad day last week on Sunday where not only they lost to the Buffalo Bills, but more injuries on top of all the number of injuries that they already have. I think they have 22 players on their injured reserve. I think I saw somewhere leading up into this episode, but it's insane. It's insane because they're not going to have Carlton Davis. They're not going to have Ali McNeil. No David Montgomery, obviously. So huge pieces for the Chicago Bears to kind of take advantage of. But also the Lions have to go into a hostile environment against a team that, again, has really nothing to lose. And, essentially win this game because they're fighting off the Vikings and they're fighting off the Eagles for the number 1 seed. So it's not like the Lions can just mosey on in here and think that they're going to win. It's going to be a tough game, I presume, if the Bears can at least play a little bit better. But really it hasn't looked like they've improved since that game against the Lions because it's been back-to-back games now where they've had 13 points or less. And since really Matt Eberflus has been fired, I don't want to say Thomas Brown hasn't been, living up to the position, but I feel like it's kind of like a lot, kind of like Jeff Ulbrich in New York with how he moved from the defense, solely defense, to being the head coach and how the defense kind of declined. It's looked the same way here. So for the Bears, they have a good opportunity here to have arguably their best win of the season. But I can't convince myself to go with them. I'm going to go with Detroit because even though they lost last week, they still put up like 42 points. So they have the capability of just outscoring the Bears, and I'm going to go with that and pick the Lions to win. I think it's going to be close, but I'm still going to roll with the Lions. Then we look at the game right under that, another huge NFC game that we have here with the Vikings taking on the Seattle Seahawks. We had a situation last week on Sunday Night Football where Geno kind of went down with a knee injury, and there was some concern with that, but it looks like he's fine. He looks like he's ready to go. I'm pretty sure he was a full participant in the later half of the week, so he should be good to go in this game. And it's a huge game for both because, like I mentioned, Minnesota is trying to catch up to the Lions. If for some reason the Lions lost and the Vikings won, that would put them to the first spot in the NFC North. And not only would that mean that, but the Lions would be a wild card team, right, in the wildest of scenarios. So they obviously have that going for them, trying to accomplish that. And also for the Seahawks, just as big a stakes as the Minnesota Vikings because they're tied with the Rams at 8-6, and still they sit outside of the playoffs. They're not even in it right now, so they desperately need a win, especially if the Commanders could lose. They could go to the same record as them potentially. So they desperately need this win at home, especially coming off of a loss last week to the Packers at home, especially. They need this game. So both teams are heading into this with a huge opportunity and a huge prize, essentially, if they win this game. So it should make for an even more entertaining game at the end of it. And I still feel like Seattle is looking for a signature kind of like prove-it win, if that makes sense, right? They haven't really been a team where I'm like, wow, like, that was very impressive. They played a complete game. They've had nice games. They've had good performances. I mean, the game against San Francisco was a good one in San Fran. I'm trying to think of other ones. I mean, the Cardinals game, the way they dominated them was pretty nice. But, I mean, the Atlanta game, I guess, was okay. But really, I haven't seen one that's really been a prove-it sort of moment. So that's really what I'm still trying to see from Seattle. And last week, also, Minnesota's offense sort of struggled after they got to, 20, 27 points. It was a struggle in that second half. The Bears could have came back, but their offense really wasn't helping them out that much. So there's also that threat, like we mentioned with the Vikings before, that they just kind of stall out a little bit. So it does open up a door for Seattle in that respect, but I'm going to go with Minnesota regardless because I don't really watch the Vikings too much, like a complete game where I see like as if I'm watching a Steelers game, but I did watch a good amount of their game against the who was it? The Falcons? No, it was the Bears last week, and they get to the quarterback a lot with Jonathan Grenard, who's exceptional, and all their pass rushers up there are very good, and Brian Flores does a great job. So I feel like they're gonna add a lot more of that, trying to get to Geno and really negate their big plays. So and the fact that their offense is just getting better as well. I'm gonna go with the Vikings in this game. Then the Bills and the Patriots, we can just skip over that. The Bills are gonna win, obviously. Not really. I have nothing written down for them. The Bills are gonna win, so that's that game. Then we got the Jaguars and the Las Vegas Raiders. Two teams, also like the Titans and Colts, that are probably going to be picking near the top 5 or top 7 in this upcoming draft. And for the Raiders, Aiden O'Connell should be back playing at quarterback after Desmond Ridder played for them last week, and it went terribly, so Aiden O'Connell should be in there again. But the Jaguars just had a pretty decent day on offense as well, right? It's not like Aiden O'Connell is going to come back and you're going to just expect the Raiders to win, right? The Jaguars had a very nice day against the Jets in a game that they probably felt they could have won. Maybe they should have won. But regardless of that, it's still like a weird scenario where these two teams, we're not going to see them past this month. So it could be just a completely wild game where kind of anything goes, right? So with that in mind, I'm going to go with the Jaguars to win this game because they got basically I wrote on here because they got a win in the last month. The Raiders haven't won since September, I want to say. And they got a bunch of injuries to Max Crosby. And obviously Christian Wilkins has been out for a good amount of time. So I'm going to go with the Jaguars. I think offensively they're just playing a lot better. And the Raiders offensively haven't really drawn too much attention other than the fact that they got Brock Bowers. So we're going to go with the Jaguars. And the Raiders should be not trying to lose, like they don't care, but they need a high draft pick. So whether it be Shador, Travis Hunter, or Cam Ward, that should be their goal. Really not winning these games at the end of the year. Then we got another scenario, unfortunately, where I don't really see these two teams kind of making it into the playoffs, unfortunately. And it's kind of weird how they kind of reflect each other in a way, just because the 49ers definitely, they were a team that people expected to be in the playoffs, and even the Dolphins, they were expected to make an even bigger jump this year, I would say, and actually not only get to the playoffs, but expected to play better. And the way that they ended last year, actually in the playoffs and things like that, I felt like people expected them to get back in there, especially with the questions around the Bills and some questions around the Jets and things like that, and knowing that the Patriots were probably not going to be that good. The fact that they're 6-8, kind of like the 49ers are 6-8, both of them really being lackluster and very underwhelming this year, it kind of reflects, in both of them, right? One looks eerily similar to the other one, so I thought that was kind of interesting. And also in terms of injuries, there's some uncertainty whether or not Tyreek's going to play. Potentially Nick Bosa, Trent Williams was another one that's been out for a couple weeks. So you also have that on top of what we already talked about. And, just in terms of what we can look ahead to this game, the Miami offense the last game really didn't do too much. They had one of their worst performances since Tua came back against Houston, and how that defense really dominated that game. And you want to talk about bad and down offense, the 49ers also, their defense played great. Their defense played very good against the Rams, but offensively, they couldn't really get anything going except field goals. So, both of these two teams need I would say, morale booster rather than like a desperate win, because I don't think they're going to make the playoffs anyway. So I think a win would serve both of these teams very well. So in terms of who's going to win this game, I'm going to go with San Francisco, because I really liked how they looked when Dre Greenlaw came back, and he's questioned with him in there alongside Fred Warner and Talanoa Hufanga coming back. So I think I like their defense a little bit more, and their offense isn't just going to kick field goals again. So we're going to go with the 49ers to win this game. And lastly here, on Sunday Night Football, we have the Buccaneers traveling to Dallas to take on the Cowboys. And the Buccaneers have been on fire recently. On offense, they've had 4 straight wins after their bye week, and now they're in first place in the NFC South. So life is good right now for the Buccaneers. They just dropped 40 points last week on the Chargers. They look like a sneaky team in the playoffs, right? One team that maybe you don't want to play because offensively they're just a unit. They're a tank on offense, and they're able to put up a bunch of points, and it makes you nervous a little bit, right? Can you keep up with them if they're hitting on all cylinders? And they're one of the only teams, I think the only team to beat the Lions and the Eagles, right? They're the only team to do that. So it kind of like gives you not hope for the Buccaneers, but like maybe like whoever plays them, it's not going to be an easy matchup by any means. So the fact that they're playing Dallas now in these circumstances, Dallas just got a nice win last week against the Panthers. For what it's worth, I know it's not much, but I picked the Panthers to win, if I'm not mistaken. So I was impressed with how the Cowboys looked, despite, the fact of where we are in the season. But in terms of this game, we're going to go with Tampa Bay because Dallas only still has 1 win in their home stadium, and it was against the Giants, so it doesn't really count. So they're still, by my book, winless at home. And the Bucs are still, it's not a cakewalk. Like the Falcons have a pretty smooth end of the year as well. So they need to keep winning, and they're in a better spot than the Cowboys, obviously. So they're still playing for something, trying to keep their spot on top of the NFC South. So I'm going to go with the Buccaneers here to beat the Cowboys in Dallas and continue their winning streak, probably behind another great offensive performance if I were to guess. So those are officially all of our picks for Week 16 in the NFL. All the games on Sunday should have, something to play for, except those 2 or 3 that we had to talk about. But, it's just another entertaining week of NFL this upcoming weekend, so we have that to look forward to. But in our last segment, I didn't get a chance to kind of react to the big news about Michael Penix and the Falcons and really Kirk Cousins. So we're going to take the last segment to talk about that, the move and what our thoughts are on it, and also a little bit on Kirk Cousins as well. So we'll be right back with that to end the show. Thank you guys for joining me here on our last segment of today's show. And I know this piece of news is really from Tuesday, but because of the break and the holiday schedule now, we didn't get a chance to talk about it. And this was a huge, kind of breaking news, portion of, the NFL that I didn't think we were ever going to see, especially at this point where there's 2 to 3 games left. I never thought I would see on my phone that the Falcons have named Michael Penix Jr. the starting quarterback, especially after a win. And as you guys see on your screen, right, have the Falcons made this change too early? It's hard to say, in all honesty, at least for me, because, like I said, for the Falcons and the long-term plan of it all, right, where you signed Kirk Cousins to a massive deal, that's obviously going to be a big talking point, right? His contract and the fact that he might not be playing going forward for the Falcons and things like that is obviously a problem because you gave him a lot of money, but also in terms of drafting the quarterback and the idea that in the moment when they drafted Michael Penix Jr., I thought that it was very unnecessary. Like, I didn't think the Falcons would ever sign Kirk and bring in Michael Penix, right? I thought at that spot they could have got so many guys that I felt could have helped them a lot more this season. But now looking back on it now in hindsight, right, it looks like a great move because if they had no other option other than Kirk, their season would really be not looking great. It would be looking like it was in danger, right? Because you wouldn't have a confident backup quarterback that you could just go to. Right now you have the quarterback that made it to last year's national championship game and had a phenomenal career in Washington and really just in college as well. So, yes, back then I thought it was a bad move, but now it obviously looks great. But still, the question really is for me, have they made it too early? Because I thought the plan was to go a year, maybe even two, with Kirk as your starter. And now obviously things change and nobody would have thought Kirk would have had a 5-game stretch where he threw 9 interceptions and only 1 passing touchdown. That obviously is a huge red flag, right? So that obviously is something that needs to change. That situation was a subject to change just in a moment's notice like that. But I don't know. I feel like it's kind of an oxymoron to say too early, but also late in this season because it is early in terms of the grand scheme of things, but in terms of this year, it's pretty late because I thought, bringing him in for a situation like right now, the Falcons, this is like do or die for them. This is a situation where, you need to win these games to make the playoffs, right? And it's in a way where you need to win these games, and not only that, but you need to make sure he plays well because I don't like any situation where the quarterback comes in and you know, like kind of like Drake May, for example, right? You know the team's not going to be great, so you can absorb some of the bad performances where, it's a development year, there's no real expectation, so it doesn't really matter in a way. But with Michael Penix, right, if he goes out there in a game where you need to win, you're playing the Giants this week, and you need to go out there and win, and let's say he doesn't play great, then it's a different situation because the Falcons need to win these games. So there's a lot more pressure, obviously, on Michael Penix to not only win the game, but win the last remaining games to give him a chance to make the playoffs. And also, if things don't go great, well, do you go back to Kirk then? Knowing that, he hasn't really shown you much, but you need to win. So do you bench the rookie because of the urge to and the necessity to win now? You need to win like this upcoming week. And if you feel like it's going wrong, how early do you make that decision? How early do you make that estimation on whether or not, Michael's maybe not ready? Let's go back to Kirk. And then switching on and off like that, I think really brings me the most worry with this situation. And, the timing of it all is a bit weird. But I can't really blame the Falcons in the same way because, and also Raheem Morris, right, if you want to bring him into it specifically because he's a first-year head coach, right? He got another opportunity here with the Falcons to actually be their official head coach, and you don't like to put it in this perspective, but he's, kind of playing for his job a little bit because if the Falcons, from where they were at 6-3, I believe, in a good spot because they had defeated the Buccaneers twice already, and they were in first place, and the Buccaneers were dealing with all those injuries, right? For you to kind of collapse like this, and not only collapse, but not even make the playoffs, that's obviously a recipe for the head coach to be fired, unfortunately. So you got to think about it a little bit with Raheem. Like, does he make this change also? I don't like saying it, but kind of like to save his job a little bit because that if you bring in Michael Penix and let's say he hits it out of the park, he plays great, then, and if he gives you a real fighting chance, then you kind of extend your stay a little bit, right? With the fact that you made this bold decision, it looks great now, and now going forward, there's a lot more optimism, right, surrounding this whole thing. It was rather the quarterback, not really this whole situation. So you got to bring that into perspective, but also, again, the fact that, like I said, you can't really blame the Falcons because Kirk was just not playing great. And the fact that he got the win against the Raiders and still they benched him, I think shows you everything that you need to know about this situation. That, despite the win, Kirk only had 112 yards. He threw a touchdown and also one interception that looked pretty bad in live form. So the fact that they only won like 15-9 also wasn't very encouraging. So, the win was great, but it took a lot, I'm sure, for them to make this decision, and especially from sources and reports coming around the situation and things like that, where they were saying that Kirk was their guy, and even Raheem Morris saying that Kirk was their quarterback just after the Minnesota loss. He still backed Kirk Cousins, and then after this week, all of a sudden, they make a change like that. They must have really felt that pressure, and the fact that Kirk really wasn't playing great is something worrying, obviously, because of the contract and everything like that. But despite the win, they made this change, and I think that said a lot as well. But with that being the case, and now, you have Michael Penix Jr. coming in here now, playing the Giants, shouldn't be too awful, right, obviously, but, you just never know, right, with the fact that they got to win this game, and everyone also, I'm sure, is expecting the Falcons to immediately just look completely different, and I'd also like to kind of extend a warning to not expect them to just put up like 40 or 30 points now all of a sudden, right? Like Kirk was playing like hot garbage or anything like that. Kirk was doing an all right job. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch considering the 9 interceptions and everything like that, but for the first part of the year, he was playing very well, and then just something happened to kind of make that switch, and then it just really nosedived. But I just like to kind of give it a bit of a warning, like, if Michael Penix Jr. comes in and is struggling a little bit, it shouldn't just be like, all right, like, he sucks, like, bring Kirk back. It can be that way as well. Also, the fact that, leading up into this decision also, where the coaches and people around Michael Penix Jr. in this whole situation have said that he's looked pretty well in practice, that he's been throwing the heck out of the football as well, does give you more confidence. So that should be something that they could build on at least, and, go into this game with a nice game plan, at least to kind of get his feet wet a little bit and make him feel comfortable, because I think we're going to tell right away whether or not the moment is a little bit too big for him or if he's actually feeling pretty well in there, right? Because the first couple snaps and the first drives are always usually scripted, so I expect him to kind of start off pretty well, hopefully, ideally, and then from then on, we could really see him, develop into something more as the game goes on. But if there was ever a time for a switch, oddly enough, it would be these two games, like I said, or the next 3 games, excuse me, because you play the Giants, and then you play a direct competitor in the Washington Commanders after this week, where they could potentially lose to the Eagles, and then you get an opportunity to play them, and hopefully, for the Falcons, beat them. It puts you in a great spot. So it's going to be a tough game, but, this is where essentially the season comes down to. And then you play the Carolina Panthers after that as well, which you should beat. It's a good situation, because if it all goes well and they win out, then Michael Penix Jr. looks like the hero of the entire story. So it's not going to be easy. It's the most important part of the year, and there's also a lot of pressure, obviously, right? Because the Falcons have to win these games. But I definitely didn't see this coming. I was very doubtful of, not only Michael Penix Jr. playing, but you want to extend it out to everybody, and Bo Nix and Drake May and everything like that. They've looked good, kind of, well, not Bo Nix so much, but really Drake May kind of easing into it and not really starting him right away. Maybe Michael Penix Jr. does the same thing, and we could see him sort of like Drake May after weeks and months of not playing, step in and look ready to play because he kind of got eased into it rather than just being thrown into it like Caleb Williams or something like that, right? He's got the weapons. He's got Drake London. Darnell Mooney's been playing great. Bijan's obviously huge. And the defense has been playing better to their respect over the last couple weeks. So it's there for Michael Penix, but actually seeing it play out is a different story, I believe. So We'll see how it all plays out on Sunday. Where Kirk stands, I'm sure I'll talk about that a little bit more in the coming days. But for right now, I think it's too new to kind of project anything with Kirk, right? I think it's still too new to kind of give a prediction like that. But it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm very excited to see Michael Penix Jr. play for the first time and see how much of an impact he makes right away. Kind of like the rest or most of the rookie class has done this year. But that is a topic for Sunday and when we return after the Christmas break, because that is the end of the show. And as a reminder to you guys, if you guys didn't join the show earlier, we're not going to have any shows next week for the Christmas break, and then we'll be back the following week on Monday and Friday before we are officially back the following week where we do shows every weekday. So I won't be seeing you guys for like 2 weeks. So for the time being now, thank you guys for joining me on today's show. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And in the meantime, while you're on Christmas break, go over to the YouTube channels, the Podcast Network channel and the Sports Network channel to catch up on more stuff regarding the Chip Shot Football Podcast with some YouTube shorts, more of the live shows, and individual segment videos as well. And as a final reminder, join me every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time as your host, Manny Maradiaga, where we cover a lot more of the NFL regarding game breakdowns, previews, all the breaking news around the NFL as well. So thank you guys again for joining me. I hope you guys have a great Christmas. Enjoy your time off, hopefully during the holidays, and I'll see you guys next year in 2025 when we get things started again on the show officially.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.